Spike and I fell out for a minute.
Uh-huh.
Because when I was working with Quentin, and he and Quentin were having that beef,
Yeah.
you know, that whole thing, and I got in the middle of it, and so we fell out for a minute. And then,
You know, I gave my feelings about Quentin Tarantino and Sam Jackson felt he had to rush to Quentin Tarantino's defense. So
At 76, Samuel L. Jackson named the one director he hates most, Spike Lee. Their friendship exploded when Jackson defended Tarantino against Lee's racism accusations, leading to a public feud that destroyed their Morehouse brotherhood. Lee refused to even watch Django Unchained while Jackson starred in it, making their split irreparable.
he didn't make us famous. We made him as famous as he supposedly made us.
But Jackson's real hatred came from Lee taking sole credit for their collaborative success, erasing Jackson's contributions to build the Spike Lee legend. This was a slow-burning betrayal that changed everything. So let's get into it. When Samuel L. Jackson finally opened up about his deepest professional disappointments, the first name that tumbled out wasn't a racist executive or exploitative producer. It was his Morehouse brother, the man who gave him his biggest early breaks, the director who should have understood him better than anyone else, Spike Lee. The feud began in the 1990s when Lee launched a public crusade against Quentin Tarantino's use of racial language in films like Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown. Lee wasn't just critiquing the language. He was questioning the integrity of any black actor who would work with Tarantino.
me and Sam are cool. You know, I gave my feelings about Quentin Tarantino and Sam Jackson felt he had to rush to Quentin Tarantino's defense. So
Lee's refusal to even watch Django Unchained represented everything Jackson came to hate about his former collaborator. Lee was making moral pronouncements about films he wouldn't even view, positioning himself as the gatekeeper of black artistic authenticity. Jackson named Lee as someone who used righteous indignation to mask his own jealousy and control issues. The breaking point came when Jackson defended Tarantino publicly, directly contradicting Lee's campaign against the director. Lee saw this as the ultimate betrayal from someone he'd helped launch to stardom.
me and Sam are cool. You know, I gave my feelings about Quentin Tarantino and Sam Jackson felt he had to rush to Quentin Tarantino's defense. So
Jackson heard that phrase, felt he had to rush, and understood exactly what Lee was implying, that Jackson's defense wasn't principled but desperate, the actions of a sellout protecting his white benefactor. Jackson named Lee as someone who weaponized their personal relationship for public manipulation, using their history to question his moral character. But Jackson's anger went deeper than just the Tarantino controversy. He revealed how Lee had always taken credit for their collaborative success, rewriting history to position himself as the creator rather than the collaborator.
Working with Spike was one of those kind of things where, I mean, people always say directors make actors, but Spike was very fortunate in that he had a lot of actors that knew each other very well and worked together in the theater here in New York. So all he had to do was give us the script. We could look at it and we could fix it or make it better, you know, and we did. So it was a symbiotic relationship. He didn't make us famous. We made him as famous as he supposedly made us.
Yeah.
Jackson's voice carried decades of accumulated bitterness when he delivered that final line. He wanted everyone to understand that Lee built his early reputation on the backs of actors who treated him as an equal, not a superior. Jackson named Lee as someone who rewrote their collaborative history to serve his own legend. The reconciliation came through their wives' intervention, but Jackson made it clear the damage was permanent. When Lee tried to maintain their public friendship, Jackson saw it as more manipulation.
Do you think you'll ever work with him again?
when I can afford them. No, Sam's a great actor, so, you know, whatever I said about Quentin Tarantino, that has nothing to do with the actor. You know, Sam's a great actor, you know.
Jackson named Lee as someone whose condescending attitude never changed, even in reconciliation. The phrase, "I can afford him," revealed Lee's belief that he was the one with power in their relationship. Jackson saw this as the perfect example of Lee's arrogance, positioning himself as the benefactor who could graciously overlook Jackson's moral failings. Jackson ultimately named Lee as someone who represented everything wrong with Black artistic leadership, using moral authority to control other artists, rewriting collaborative history for personal gain, and weaponizing personal relationships for public positioning. Their Morehouse brotherhood meant nothing when it conflicted with Lee's need to be seen as the moral center of Black cinema. If you thought Spike Lee represented Jackson's most painful personal betrayal, Quentin Tarantino embodied his most complicated professional relationship. Jackson had defended Tarantino for decades against charges of racism and cultural appropriation. But when the director launched an unprovoked attack on Marvel movies and their stars, Jackson finally understood how expendable he was to the man who built his reputation partly on Jackson's iconic performances. The breaking point came in 2021 when Tarantino appeared on the Two Bears One Cave podcast and dismissed the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe as a threat to real cinema. But his attack wasn't just on the movies, it was on the actors themselves. Tarantino's dismissal of Marvel actors as not movie stars was a direct attack on Jackson's legacy. Jackson had spent over a decade playing Nick Fury, helping build the MCU into the most successful film franchise in history. But according to Tarantino, none of that counted as real stardom because the characters were more important than the actors. Tarantino was essentially arguing that Jackson and his Marvel colleagues weren't real movie stars because audiences came to see the characters, not the performers. This was particularly insulting to Jackson, who had provided decades of cover for Tarantino against charges of racism, often at the cost of relationships with other Black filmmakers. Jackson didn't stay silent. When asked about Tarantino's comments on The View, he fired back with characteristic directness.
Well, it takes an actor to be those particular characters. And the sign of movie stardom has always been, what, asses in seats? Well, apparently these actors are movie stars. You know, Chadwick Boseman is Black Panther. You know?
Of course.
You can't refute that, and he's a movie star.
Jackson's defense was personal and pointed. By invoking Chadwick Boseman, who had died just months earlier, Jackson was making it clear that Tarantino's dismissal wasn't just wrong. It was disrespectful to artists who had poured their souls into these roles. Jackson named Tarantino as someone who would diminish Boseman's legacy to make a pretentious point about cinematic purity. But Jackson's anger wasn't just about the Marvel comments. He began revealing how Tarantino had always positioned himself as the ultimate authority on cinema, while never acknowledging the contributions of his collaborators.
You know, I always tell people, I don't understand why they can't look at his work and realize that every character he's ever given me has pretty much been the smartest character in the film, that has the most dignity and respect and kind of runs things and is not a fool of any sort and understands a whole lot about what's going on in life and in the world. And for him to write characters like that for me would be impossible for a racist to do.
Jackson had spent years making this argument, defending Tarantino against critics who saw racist exploitation in their collaborations. But Jackson named Tarantino as someone who never returned that loyalty, never acknowledged the personal cost Jackson paid for providing that defense. The most painful example came with Django Unchained, where Tarantino pushed Jackson into playing the most controversial role of his career, Stephen, a house slave so loyal to his white master that he becomes complicit in the oppression of other slaves.
And I called him back and said, so you want me to be the most despicable Negro in the history of cinema? And he was like, well, yeah. It's like, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Because it was that kind of challenge to me.
Jackson had embraced that challenge, delivering a performance that was both brilliant and deeply uncomfortable. But he named Tarantino as someone who collected awards and accolades for that film, while Jackson carried the burden of defending his choice to play such a morally complex character.
Disappointment in all that is that as wonderful as Steven is in Django, that's the tame Steven. He edited out all the really bad things that I did in the movie because he said, I don't want anybody to kill you. Because, you know, Steven's kind of a nasty character.
Even in their most successful collaboration, Jackson revealed how Tarantino had limited his performance out of concern for Jackson's safety and reputation. Jackson named Tarantino as someone who was willing to push him into controversial territory, but wasn't willing to fully support him when the controversy came. Jackson's relationship with Tarantino represented the complexity of interracial artistic collaboration in Hollywood. Tarantino had given him career-defining roles and treated his characters with intelligence and respect. But Jackson named him as someone who took that loyalty for granted, who used Jackson's defense against charges of racism while never acknowledging the personal cost of providing that cover. When Tarantino dismissed Marvel actors as not real movie stars, he was dismissing Jackson's decade-long contribution to the most successful film franchise in history. Jackson named Tarantino as someone who had become so invested in his own artistic superiority that he couldn't acknowledge excellence in forms he didn't personally value. When Samuel L. Jackson started naming the people who had disappointed him most in Hollywood, Kenan Thompson's inclusion shocked everyone who saw their conflict as a minor comedy sketch mishap. But Jackson's lingering resentment revealed something darker about his character, his complete inability to forgive anyone who made him look foolish, regardless of their intent or the circumstances involved. The incident occurred during a November 2006 episode of Saturday Night Live, where Jackson appeared as a guest on the recurring What's Up With That sketch hosted by Kenan Thompson's character, DeAndre Cole. The sketch was supposed to involve Jackson almost saying the F word before Thompson's character cut him off, but a miscommunication led to disaster.
Kenan got me banned from Saturday Night Live.
Did.
Shut up.
He told me to tell you. He told me,
did.
he's like, you know, Sam.
He didn't cut me off soon enough, and I said the forbidden word on television. It was like, oh, he was supposed to cut me off.
He was supposed to. That's why I told him, I was like, if Sam was about to curse, you're supposed to cut him off. You know that's how we do it.
He didn't.
He didn't.
Jackson's version of events painted Thompson as incompetent and unprofessional. He had come to SNL expecting to promote his charitable foundation with dignity, but instead found himself cursing on live television and looking like an amateur who didn't understand basic sketch comedy formats. Jackson named Thompson as someone who had failed in his basic professional duties. But Thompson's explanation revealed a very different story about what actually happened that night.
He dropped the F-bomb on the show, but he says I was supposed to cut him off before that. But the cue card, it was just an F on the cue card. It wasn't like the whole word.
Oh, yeah, no other letter.
I was thinking he was just gonna go like a fake move and just stop at the F, you know what I mean?
Of course, what the
full train at it because, you know, I guess he's a method kind of guy.
Exactly.
Thompson's account made it clear that Jackson had completely misunderstood the sketch format. The cue card only showed an F. Jackson was supposed to fake starting the word and stop himself. Instead, he delivered the complete expletive because he was staying in character. But Jackson's problems were just beginning.
This happened, I was like, okay, whatever, that was pretty cool, but
Yeah.
you know, we kind of expect the F word out of Sam Jackson, so no harm done.
Yeah, every
But
time
then-
he's on, yeah, we know that that's probably going to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
Then he doubled down and said it again. I was like, yo, my man, we got to pay for those. You know what I'm saying? And it got a reaction.
A lot of
and
money,
we were able to
yeah.
like get out of the moment. But yeah, he's been mad at me for that. So
Jackson had said the word not once, but twice on live television, forcing NBC to pay massive FCC fines. Thompson tried to handle the situation professionally, but Jackson was already looking for someone to blame for his own mistake. Jackson named Thompson as someone who had embarrassed him on national television, even though Thompson had tried to protect him from further consequences. Thompson's response to Jackson's years of public criticism demonstrated remarkable grace under pressure.
You know what he's talking
I
about?
don't have the authority to do that. I don't know why he thinks that. But no, this is a great story. And which camera am I on?
You can go to one.
I'm on there. Hey, Sam. It's all good, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're welcome anytime, from what I've been hearing.
Yeah.
Thompson was publicly correcting Jackson's narrative while maintaining professional courtesy, essentially saying, "I can't ban anyone from SNL, so stop blaming me for your problems." But Jackson's ego couldn't handle being corrected by someone he viewed as beneath his status. The actual sketch footage revealed even more about Jackson's mindset that night. He had come to SNL with serious intentions, planning to discuss his Samuel L. Jackson Foundation and its charitable work.
Okay, that's how it is. Now, I'm trying to talk about helping people here. So don't you dare cut me off.
Jackson's visible frustration during the sketch showed someone who expected to be treated differently than other guests. His foundation work was serious to him, and being interrupted for comedy felt like disrespect. Jackson named Thompson as someone who had reduced his important message to a comedy bit. But Jackson's anger revealed something deeper about his relationship with younger black entertainers. Thompson represented a generation of comedians who had achieved success through Nickelodeon and sketch comedy, without paying the same dues Jackson endured in his climb to stardom. When Thompson failed to save Jackson from his own mistake, it confirmed Jackson's belief that the new generation didn't understand or respect their elders. Jackson also named Thompson as someone who had violated the unspoken rules of celebrity protection. In Jackson's world, supporting cast members were supposed to look out for guest stars, especially legendary ones. Thompson's failure to prevent Jackson's embarrassment felt like a fundamental breach of professional etiquette. The power dynamic made Jackson's behavior particularly problematic. Thompson was a working comedian who depended on maintaining good relationships with guest stars, while Jackson was a legendary actor with enough influence to damage careers with well-placed criticism. Jackson named Thompson as someone who deserved ongoing public punishment for a simple miscommunication, using his superior status to target someone who couldn't effectively fight back. Jackson's treatment of Thompson represented his inability to accept responsibility for his own mistakes. Rather than acknowledging that he had misunderstood the sketch format, Jackson spent years creating a narrative where Thompson was the villain who had failed to protect his reputation. Jackson named Thompson as someone who embodied everything he feared about the industry's future: success without struggle, achievement without sacrifice, and respect without earning it through decades of hard work. Samuel L. Jackson's resentment toward Steve Harvey ran deeper than their public friendship suggested. While they vacationed together on luxury yachts and maintained the appearance of black success solidarity, Jackson harbored profound contempt for what Harvey represented in modern entertainment: the sanitization of black struggle for mainstream consumption. The tension became visible in how Jackson described their group vacations with Magic Johnson and other wealthy black celebrities. What should have been celebrations of their collective success became opportunities for Jackson to reveal his true feelings about Harvey's approach to fame and influence.
You got all my favorite friends. So you got Kenny Leon,
Yeah.
Magic Johnson,
Right.
Steve Harvey. I hear y'all take vacations together on the yacht or something.
Well, we get on the boat with Magic and Cookie. Steve and Marjorie have their own boat.
Jackson's casual mention of Harvey having their own boat carried subtle implications about hierarchy and distance within their group. While Jackson and his wife joined Magic Johnson on his yacht, Harvey maintained separation with his own vessel. Jackson named Harvey as someone who couldn't fully integrate into their circle, always maintaining the performance of success rather than simply living it.
One year, we got a boat. LaTanya and I got a boat. Cookie and Irvin had their boat. Steve had their boat. And there was this dope-ass picture that we took of all three yachts with a drone going together.
You see that? That's some boss
in a
stuff
row.
right there.
So
Wow.
It was like it was a big rich black folk picture.
Yeah.
Jackson's description of their group photo as a rich black folk picture wasn't just descriptive, it was loaded with criticism disguised as celebration. The phrase suggested discomfort with the optics of their wealth display, and Jackson named Harvey as someone who was too comfortable performing success for public consumption, rather than simply enjoying it privately. But Jackson's real issue with Harvey was philosophical. Harvey had built his empire through family-friendly comedy, relationship advice, and motivational speaking, positioning himself as a moral authority in the Black community. Jackson saw this transformation as a betrayal of authentic Black artistic expression. Harvey's success came through telling Black audiences what they wanted to hear about relationships, personal responsibility, and traditional values. His books like Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man reinforced conventional gender roles and conservative relationship dynamics that Jackson found limiting and regressive.
Jimmy Kimmel photoshops himself into our vacation pictures every year. So, but yeah, that's all. Yeah, John and Vicky be happy they made your show. Look at that.
Jackson's amusement at Jimmy Kimmel inserting himself into their exclusive group photos revealed his protective attitude toward their wealthy Black circle. But when Jackson talked about their group dynamics, he consistently centered Magic Johnson while barely acknowledging Harvey as an individual presence, suggesting he viewed Harvey's achievements as somehow less substantial. The contrast between their career paths represented different approaches to Black success in Hollywood. Harvey had cleaned up his image, embraced traditional values, and found mainstream acceptance by making white audiences comfortable with his Black success. Jackson had built his career on morally complex characters who challenged audiences with difficult truths about violence, race, and power.
Vacation is do nothing, sleep all you want to sleep. Generally, the first day on the boat, I sleep 16 hours, you know? And then I get up and, you know, boom. And the chef's been warned and whatever, so we get a chef now that can make grits.
Even Jackson's approach to vacation differed from Harvey's brand of constant hustle and motivation. Where Harvey preached about grinding 24/7 and maximizing every opportunity, Jackson believed in complete disconnection from work during personal time. Jackson named Harvey as someone who represented the toxic culture of commodifying every moment for productivity and profit. Jackson's resentment toward Harvey also reflected broader tensions within Black entertainment about respectability politics and authentic representation. Harvey found success by reinforcing traditional family values and conservative messaging that often aligned with white conservative viewpoints. Jackson named Harvey as someone who had chosen commercial appeal over artistic integrity. Harvey's transformation from struggling comedian to multimedia mogul came through embracing respectability politics, cleaning up his image, promoting traditional gender roles, and finding success by making Black audiences feel good about conventional wisdom. Jackson named Harvey as someone who represented the sanitization of Black struggle for mainstream comfort. For Jackson, Harvey's approach felt like a betrayal of the generations of Black entertainers who had fought for the right to be complex, controversial, and uncompromising. Previous artists had established that Black performers didn't need to sanitize themselves for mainstream acceptance, but Harvey's success suggested that audiences preferred their Black entertainers safe and predictable. Jackson named Harvey as someone whose empire was built on making white audiences comfortable with Black success by ensuring that success came packaged with conservative values and traditional messaging. While Jackson had spent his career challenging all audiences with difficult truths, Harvey had found massive success by confirming what people already believed about relationships, success, and personal responsibility. Jackson didn't hate Harvey personally, but he named him as someone whose approach to success represented everything wrong with modern Black celebrity culture: the performance of wisdom for profit, the commodification of struggle for motivational content, and the reduction of complex social issues into digestible self-help advice. When Samuel L. Jackson finally started naming the people who had disappointed him most profoundly, Kanye West's inclusion represented his most painful confrontation with the limits of Black solidarity. Jackson had spent his entire career defending controversial Black artists, but Kanye's transformation from groundbreaking musician to cultural provocateur forced him to confront the price of unconditional support. Jackson's relationship with Kanye began like many of his industry relationships, with respect for artistic talent and a willingness to provide cover against unfair criticism. But as Kanye's behavior became increasingly erratic and harmful, Jackson found himself in the impossible position of watching someone he'd supported systematically destroy the progress that previous generations had fought to achieve. The breaking point came when Kanye began making anti-Semitic statements and aligning himself with white supremacist figures, actions that Jackson saw as the ultimate betrayal of black artistic responsibility. But Jackson's criticism wasn't just about Kanye's specific statements. It was about his calculated approach to controversy for commercial gain.
I mean, if he's trying to sell music, apparently he's cultivating a new audience, like I said, so I don't know.
Are you no longer a fan?
It had nothing to do with fandom. It's politics, state of the world. You know, fanning is not one of those things I do anyway. I mean, I listen to his music, I can appreciate it on a certain level, you know, the poetry of it, sometimes the thought that goes into it. I may or may not go out of my way to hear the next one. All depends.
Jackson's phrase, cultivating a new audience, cut to the heart of his disappointment with Kanye. Jackson named Kanye as someone whose controversial statements weren't expressions of genuine belief, but calculated business decisions designed to attract specific demographics. If Kanye was simply expressing authentic views, Jackson might have understood that. But manufacturing controversy to sell music represented everything Jackson found despicable about modern celebrity culture. Jackson's comment about politics state of the world revealed his understanding that Kanye's behavior existed within a larger context of racial and political manipulation. Jackson named Kanye as someone who allowed himself to be weaponized by political forces that didn't have black communities' best interests at heart. The tragedy of Jackson's relationship with Kanye was that it represented the failure of mentorship and community support within black entertainment. Jackson had always been willing to defend younger black artists against industry pressure, providing the kind of protection and guidance that he wished he'd received during his own early career struggles. But Kanye's willingness to platform harmful ideologies for personal attention violated every principle that Jackson's generation had established about using celebrity responsibly. Jackson had spent decades building bridges between different communities through his film work, proving that black artists could be controversial without being destructive, complex without being chaotic. Jackson's background as someone expelled from Morehouse for political activism gave his criticism of Kanye additional weight. He understood the importance of black voices in political discourse, but he also understood the responsibility that came with platform and influence.
Oh man, Jesse Williams.
Yeah. Amazing.
Woo!
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, okay, this some Stokely Carmichael Rap Brown shit here. You know, this the kind of talk we need to hear. The brothers need to understand it. This is not painted and fluffed up in, you know, big words and politically correct statements that won't hurt white people's feelings. Yeah.
Jackson's praise for Jesse Williams's BET Awards speech created a stark contrast with his disappointment in Kanye. Jackson named Williams as someone who represented authentic revolutionary rhetoric designed to inspire action and progress. Kanye, by contrast, represented chaos and division, disguised as activism.
The world ain't gonna change just because you want it to.
Jackson's philosophy about change work directly contradicted Kanye's chaotic approach to social issues. Jackson named Kanye as someone who wanted the benefits of activist credibility without doing the sustained, difficult work that real change required. Jackson had spent decades fighting for progress through strategic relationships and careful navigation of industry politics, and he watched Kanye destroy years of collective work with impulsive statements and erratic behavior. Jackson named Kanye as someone who had failed the fundamental test of community responsibility. After generations of black entertainers working to build credibility, respect, and cultural influence, Jackson watched Kanye systematically destroy those gains for personal attention and financial profit. What Jackson found most unforgivable about Kanye's behavior was how it provided ammunition for people who were always looking for reasons to dismiss Black artistic contributions and political engagement. Jackson had spent his career proving that Black artists could be politically engaged without being politically weaponized, but Kanye's actions gave opponents easy talking points about Black instability and unreliability. Jackson named Kanye as someone who represented the worst-case scenario of what happens when Black artists prioritize individual success over collective responsibility. Kanye's willingness to damage Black solidarity for personal gain represented a fundamental betrayal of the values that Jackson's generation fought to establish in Hollywood. The admission that he listened to his music and could appreciate it on a certain level revealed Jackson's struggle to separate the artist from the art. As someone who had worked with morally complicated figures throughout his career, Jackson understood that artistic merit and personal behavior don't always align. But his final comment, "I may or may not go out of my way to hear the next moment all depends," showed that Kanye had damaged their relationship beyond repair. Jackson named Kanye as someone who had weaponized Black pain and struggle for personal profit, someone who had taken the platform that previous generations died to create and used it to spread messages that undermined everything they had fought to achieve. For Jackson, who had navigated Hollywood politics for over 4 decades while maintaining his principles, Kanye represented the ultimate cautionary tale about what happens when talent isn't balanced with responsibility. At 76, Samuel L. Jackson had finally broken his decades-long silence about Hollywood's most toxic relationships. He'd named Spike Lee as someone who weaponized moral authority for personal control, Quentin Tarantino as someone who took loyalty for granted while dismissing his collaborators' achievements, Kenan Thompson as someone who represented disrespect disguised as generational change, Steve Harvey as someone who sanitized Black struggle for commercial gain, and Kanye West as someone who betrayed everything previous generations had built for personal attention. His willingness to speak these truths publicly sent shockwaves through an industry built on diplomatic silence and professional courtesy. But Jackson had reached a point where protecting other people's feelings mattered less than protecting his own legacy and the principles he'd fought for throughout his legendary career. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.